Well, hello and welcome to our Mexico City edition of My Surrogacy Journey, the podcast for US intended parents. I'm Wes, I'm your host, and I'm joined by the amazing Jess. Go introduce yourself, Jess.
Hi, I'm one of the other hosts. I'm Jess. I'm a mom through surrogacy, and I am the membership manager for all of our American intended parents coming to Mexico City for surrogacy.
And we've recently launched a very tailored program and pathway for very specifically for US intended parents coming from the US to Mexico City, wanting to explore surrogacy and options for family creation. And the episode we're really talking about today, and I'll introduce our amazing guest in a second, but it's all about choosing and working with an egg donor, if that's a component that you need to help navigate through your journey. So let's talk to our amazing guest. Jess, why don't you introduce? Come on.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I'm so excited to be joined by our amazing guests and just wonderful colleagues, Debbie and Jess. So, Debbie, do you want to introduce yourself first?
I'm Debbie Evans. I'm the Clinical and Compliance Director at MSJ. I'll be helping support the ethical donation team to make sure that they remain compliant.
Hi, I'm Joss. So I am the surrogate and egg donor membership manager globally. So I am here today to talk about all the wonderful things that are ethical donation. It's my first podcast today, so thank you so much for having me today, guys.
We are so excited to have you and to talk all things egg donor, Ethica, because not all of our intended parents are going to need an egg donor. Some intended parents will have already had embryos created and are waiting in the freezer, basically, to transport. But for any of our intended parents who are on our creating pathway, this is going to be an episode that you're going to want to listen to really closely, because choosing an egg donor and understanding those choices, how our egg donors come to be, the screening involved, all of that is going to be really important and, should hopefully factor into your decision-making process.
Yeah, so I think both of you have kind of undersold yourself. So I'm just going to give you a bit more. So Debbie is based in the UK. Debbie has been a fertility nurse, and more than actually a fertility nurse, she's run a fertility clinic, one of the most successful fertility clinics that navigate through surrogacy in the UK. She's very, very experienced, and she's allegedly retired now, but we are on board, and she's and then Jocelyn's been in. She looks after our surrogates from a global point of view, but also from an egg donor point of view. And we're going to talk a little bit more about Ethicus. I know it's been mentioned, but Joss manages and heads up our ethical donation program. And well, we might as well just jump straight into it, because
What is Ethica?
so Michael and I, when we embarked on our Mexico City pathway, one of the challenges we found with people or recipients who needed donors was that there just wasn't a robust enough framework to help people navigate through it. And it just didn't really meet our expectations around our ethics and all of those things. We just wanted to make sure that we could put a really robust framework in place and align it with the way that we work with intended parents and with surrogates to make sure that everyone is getting the same level of support, ethical considerations and all of those elements. So we have launched our own donor program, which is called Ethical Donation. Michael came up with the name, which is obviously Greek for ethical, so it all makes sense. But Joss is kind of managing that up, and she's very much supported by Debbie, but also Danielle, who's a new addition to the team, who's also a nurse. Lots of experience. So, ultimately we've kind of built an environment where you can have access to donors, and hopefully without compromise, because I think that's some of the characteristics and some of the elements that we've been seeing with people choosing donors here in Mexico City, is that often they choose this pathway, which is sometimes, not always, price driven, and then they sometimes just don't have the donor availability that they're looking for, but because it's been driven by price and sometimes this is their only option, they're then having to make compromises on the types of donors they would choose. If money wasn't an issue, then they would make different choices. So we're trying to create an environment where people don't have to make compromises, where we can facilitate and make sure that all of the donors are treated fairly, they're looked after in the MSJ way, but via Ethica. And that's kind of the framework around Ethica donation. And it is meant to and does support and complement the intended parents going through an MSJ pathway. But it also allows the intended parents and the recipients to get a really seamless process, because often sometimes when we're dealing with donors that, through other organizations, whether it be clinic or specific donor agencies, there's limitations to how much impact we can have, right? And how much you can support them and how much information. And then there's always that to and throwing back to, help navigate through. Whereas if we're very much more aligned because we're the same organization, that whole integration piece and the way that the communication, the way that everyone's treated is much more efficient.
Great. Perfect.
So, Jocelyn, this is your first podcast, and I know you're going to be amazing. But I just also wanted to acknowledge that I am recording this podcast with 3 amazing, empowered women who massively support our organization, that add a dynamic that obviously I can't add. But we have an amazing team, and that's one of the, whether it's My Surrogacy Journey, whether it's Ethica Donation, you are going to be greeted and going to be working with people who are experts in the field, So Jocelyn will manage all of the operational elements, and then Debbie or Danielle will manage all of the clinical elements. And I think that's a really important piece, isn't it? Because there's a massive clinical need within the whole donation process, but there's also a logistical piece which needs managing, and it's how we look at that. And then it's also about how do we provide the education, and how do we make sure people are going into donation with their eyes wide open. What I often see with a lot of recipients or intended parents that I'm talking to around donation is that they're very much thinking about the here and now, the decision, the choices they have to make about choosing the donor. And they're often not really thinking about the decisions or the impact of the decisions now when their children are older, or they're asking them about their, genetic origins and all of those things. So I think, and I often say to people that choosing a donor is probably the most important element of this journey. It's one that's going to have the wide-ranging impacts to everything.
Absolutely. I mean, choosing a surrogate and working with a surrogate is an amazing step, and it's absolutely vital. But your surrogate is going to be your surrogate for a limited period of time in reality, whatever that relationship looks like afterwards. But the genetics of your egg donor and that is going to really have a lifelong, potential impact. So that kind of brings me to my first question. Now, as you, the listener, will know, a huge reason why we do this podcast is to provide you with information, but also education so that you can make informed decisions and make the best choices for you and your growing family. So hopefully that's what we're going to do here today. So kind of, if you were an intended parent, or if you were advising an intended parent who is starting to consider their egg donor and look for an egg donor, what are some of the most important factors that they should be thinking about as they go through this decision?
So I think, first of all, thank you so much for framing that so amazingly. Ethical donation for us is so integral in regards to the MSJ family and business, because we know that we are, global leaders in surrogacy, and we have, done so many incredible things. You said education is important. It's absolutely key for us as a business to be able to encourage that education piece. And for us, really going forward, what we want to do is apply those same principles, if you like, for egg donation. We want to make sure that our egg donors and our recipients are completely, our process has complete transparency. So we need to be really clear about the journey ahead, because it's emotive, right? You've said that already, that this is a huge decision. It's not any decision that's going to be rushed, as a business, and from Ethica and an ethical point of view, we are there to hold everyone's hand, the recipients, the egg donors, to make sure that pathway, every step, every touch point is discussed. All of those questions are answered, by all of our incredible team. The Ethica team is growing, which is incredible. I'm excited for that. It's really great to have the support, like you mentioned, Wes, of Danielle, who's come into the business, and she has so much experience, and being able to keep within that medical framework is incredibly important to us. So first of all, being able to talk to recipients about what the journey ahead looks like is important. We need to be really clear about what could happen. It's really important that we are honest about what potential risks are, about what the bumps in the road might look like. We're really proud to be looking at all of the touch points in regards to the medical support that will be on hand, not just in the UK, but also in Mexico. It's important that we introduce all of this support network, all of the medical support, all of the emotional support as well. So we're going to make sure that, again, equally, our members, whether they be egg donors or recipients, have that full continuity, that holistic, if you like, approach to the care that we offer.
And it will be local to the intended parents and to the surrogates, right? Or sorry, not the surrogates, to the egg donors. So whether the egg donor is in Mexico or the US, again, and wherever the recipient or the intended parents are, it's going to be local and tailored to them. Is that right?
Absolutely, yes. So we have a full team now, which is growing, which is incredible in Mexico City. So we have that as well for our egg donors, because we think that's really important for them to understand that they too, they are incredibly important in this process. You said about education, and for us, again, every touch point, we are putting in all of those processes where they will understand every one of those processes. We want to make sure that they go into it with their eyes completely wide open. We want to make sure the support network is there for them in Mexico City. But you're absolutely right. The recipients have, a lot of need for that emotional support, for that medical support. It's important that they are able to reach out. That honesty piece, again, that transparency, the continuity of care is there. We are there as a team to support them every step of the way.
I know that from, sorry to jump in there, but I know that some intended parents, recipients, they find the whole process of kind of managing the criteria, they find the whole process, then looking through the donors, looking at, and then sometimes, a lot more information is it makes the whole process even much harder. So, and I think we recognize and acknowledge how sometimes emotional and difficult it can be to try and narrow it down and find that perfect ideal donor. We know the perfect donor doesn't exist, but the ideal one does.
Yeah.
And then it's us as a team that's going to help you understand and hopefully find that ideal donor.
So, Debbie, in your experience, having worked in the fertility world for
Too many years. Let's not go down there. Yeah.
how do most intended parents choose their donor? What are they looking for? What's the criteria?
Yeah, so that's really important. When I have that first conversation with them and they're embarking on choosing a donor, I say, okay, sit down together as a couple, decide what's really important to you, and make that your wish list, as it were. But really, really, really do not make that really prescriptive, because the longer that list is, the harder it is to find that donor for you. There isn't that absolute perfect donor out there, but like Wes alluded to earlier, we don't want you to compromise. We want you to get the best out of that. Consider nature versus nurture. That's really important. So the environment that you're going to be bringing your child up in will have a huge impact on your child and that development. The genetics will have some play, but really the nurture is going to be the really important key point. So if you think about things like education, if you want a university educated donor, the likelihood of finding that is going to be smaller. I'm not saying that the university educated donors are not out there, of course they are, but they're going to be fewer. So consider, if that's really if education at a higher level is really important to you, then consider the nurture aspect of that. So don't be too prescriptive. We're all going to ask you, hair color, eye color, skin color. That may be important. Height, weight, their social activities, what kind of person they are may really resonate with you, because that's really important to you as a couple. So really consider that list, but don't make it too prescriptive.
And I would just jump in there because I have 2 children, 2 surrogacy, both donor conceived. Talulah, our daughter, she's biolate to Michael. But what I would absolutely say is that Talulah is more like me than me.
Yeah.
And that just demonstrates. I mean, it's just massive. The looks that she gives Michael are just the looks that I give him, and he's like, he feels like we're ganging up on him. And he's like, it's just, but it's really, in our family, it really highlights that whole mechanism of nature versus nurture. And I'm true, whereas Duke, our little boy who's biolate to me, he's just like Michael. know, and there's probably a lot of dynamics at play here around it, of how we create our family, but it's absolutely, not the be all and end all.
No, it's not. And really consider that.
Yeah, and I think it's just about, taking an open mind to it and just be realistic about, what your expectations are around donation and really trying to help manage those expectations. Like I said, the donor information that you're going to get access to, it often then makes it more difficult to make those decisions. But this is only you guys who are making those decisions about the type of donor you work with. You've got to make that decision, and ultimately you have to be at peace with that decision, because it's one that's going to impact you and your future family for the rest of their lives. So it's no pressure.
And we want to make that process as easy as possible. So, the beauty of what we're doing is that we are considering both aspects of how we, provide the information surrounding the donors. So the questions that we're asking the donors, like Debbie said, who are they as a person? What do they enjoy doing? What are their likes, their dislikes? Why do they want to be an egg donor? And all of those things. I think it's really important for a recipient to understand, and the platform and the access to the information regarding the donors will be there for the recipients to look through. And whilst we want to be able to filter down to the specifics, like Demi said, there'll be certain characteristics that they want to look for or might want to consider, we want to give them, again, choice. It's so incredibly important to us as a business. We have values that we stick to, and, choice, transparency, all of that is really, really important to us.
What I also say to intended parents is that this process that you're going through now, right, although your children aren't here yet, this is part of their journey.
Yes,
Absolutely. And at some point in the near future, or whatever age you have those conversations, your child may ask you, how did you choose a donor? So I like, it's a big responsibility, because you have to be able to, with confidence, say, well, we went through this, we did this, we considered this. I mean, how empowering is that going to make a child feel, is that you considered all of these things and you went to that depth, rather than saying, no, we just chose the one that looked like, a flippant answer. We should always be really considering this, and I think that's a really important thing to consider in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say, having seen, the work that you guys are doing behind the scenes is so incredibly privileged. But, building up Ethica, you don't just decide to offer a light. So the work that you guys are doing to figure out what is the important information, what can we gather from these egg donors to share with intended parents to help them make those informed choices, whether it be on physical characteristics, family health history, motivations, personality, all of that stuff. You have been so incredibly considered and thoughtful about, just about that whole process. So I think intended recipients, intended parents, are going to be able to see that in what we provide, and the information that we're sharing. But that brings me on to something that you mentioned, Joss, is the motivations and why an egg donor would potentially want to become an egg donor. I mean, I think that's a big question for a lot of intended parents. Why is somebody,
why do they want to do
why do they want to do that? I mean, do you guys have any insight that, obviously it really depends on every egg donor, but what are some general ones that you guys have seen?
No, I mean, we do see variations of it. And as I say, the reason why we go into the detail of it in the profiles is because we want to really understand what is it that's brought you here today. We talk about journeys, and everybody has that journey. And egg donors, we have a lot who come to us who have had, friends or family who have had fertility, concerns, problems, and that altruistic nature of someone, comes out when they hear someone's journey. That could be incredibly sad, that could be really emotive, and actually they are then brought into, wanting to help, which is fantastic and incredible. Let's be really clear, these are incredible human beings.
Absolutely.
Hence why we want to nurture them and take good care of them. So, there is definitely that side, and that's fantastic. We hear about, a financial aspect in regards to Mexico City. It could be, supporting an income that they already have, and again, we want to, from an ethical point of view, understand more of that as well. So, at this point, we do a lot of, as I say, support and sort of hand holding throughout the procedure. And if there's anything we can do to support them in regards to the reason why they want to be a donor, we've said that knowledge is power. We want to empower our donors to have that and make that decision, but also know that it's the right decision. And how lovely from a recipient's point of view that they can be really confident when they're talking to their friends and family, that they understand that the egg donor that they, are choosing, it's done in the right way. Everybody wants to acknowledge that. And from a business point of view, we're banging that drum really loud. We're really...
When you talk to our donors, they'll quite often say, if they've come from a background where they've had friends or family that need some aspects of fertility care, and they potentially might not have been able to offer their eggs to the family member, but it sparked them to think about, actually, I can't do that here because that's a bit too close to home, but that's really empowered me, and I think I want to really help somebody else because now my family member needs help from somebody, so we can, go back and just really make sure that everyone has those choices.
And we really only want to work with the donors who have the right motivation, right? Because this is about doing the right thing. We're called Ethica. Again, it's about always looking through that ethical lens in everything we do. And the future outcomes for the children conceived through donation likely to be more positive if the donor is doing this with the right motivations, and then and then there's the potential if a recipient or the child born through donor conception wants to potentially make contact with their donor later down the line. If they've done it with the right motivations, they're more likely to be happy to be contacted and to be happy to be, give them more information about their genetic origins, which is a really important factor, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, obviously, Ethica sits, kind of alongside next to My Surrogacy Journey. And we speak about in other podcasts the surrogate screening that we do to make sure that our surrogates are taken care of, that this is all being done ethically, that there's no coercion, and also about the clinical side of that screening. So can you both talk to you and Joss, I guess, a little bit about the more social screening that our egg donors go through? And then Debbie, would you talk a little bit about the clinical screening that they go through?
I'm happy to talk about clinical. So we need to start off with, I jumped in then, didn't I? That's okay.
You go.
We need to, so before our donors can be accepted to our program, they'll complete a health questionnaire. So that's generic health questions that we need to understand, something to do with their genetics, with their family histories. And once they pass that, then the next stage would be, have they actually got ovarian reserve? And that's really important. You could have a young woman that presents herself forward for an egg donation program, and then they find that they're AMH, which is anti-Mullerian hormone, and that's the hormone that measures our ovarian reserve. It tells us what our stock of eggs is. As women, we're born with our stock of eggs, and that stock dwindles every month when we have our cycles. We use up a cohort from that stock. And eventually, around about the age of 35, that stock really dwindles very quickly. And then we get through to the menopause. And that's when our stock is completely run out. So it's really important that we capture that these women that are putting themselves forward in an egg donation program have ovarian reserve. And the misconception is, well, if I become a donor, I'm going to give up all my eggs, and therefore my future fertility is prohibited because I've now given away most of my eggs. It doesn't work like that. Every month you will bring a cohort from your stock, and it could be 15, 20, 25 that sits in your ovaries, and your natural hormone response would be that one of those would become the dominant follicle and produce the egg. When that egg is ovulated at the right time of the cycle, the rest of them will go with it. So we're only using in that individual cycle, that month that woman is donating her eggs, we're just using that cohort from that month. So we're not taking anything from her stock. So just to really key points that we're not using up vulnerable women's eggs and leaving them without a future for their own. So we need to measure that AMH. We need to understand that they've got ovarian reserve in the first place. Then once they've ascertained that we have got that ovarian reserve, we then need to do lots of other screening and scans. And so we educate our donors that this is a mechanism that they need to go through, because we need to test for various virologies HIVs, hepatitis B and C, various STDs. But we also want to look at your karyotype, so your genetic makeup, your chromosomes, and make sure that there's nothing sitting within that history that could potentially bring harm to your donation and therefore a future child. So the screening is very robust, and it's there for a reason, because when you donate a gamete, we need to make sure that you're healthy and fit to do so. So as much as so for our recipients, be really reassured that the screening program that they have to go through is incredibly robust.
And is that screening program do they do that screening before they're available to donate, or do they do that once they've been chosen by a recipient parent?
So we do the AMH before, so we make sure there's no point you being matched or potentially looking to match with an egg donor that potentially might not have an ovarian reserve. So that bit's done prior to that and either matching. Once they're matched, because the screening is time constrained and it has to be within a certain time of the egg retrieval. So there's no point us doing that screening until we know that we've matched you and we've got a time frame for the egg retrieval to take place. So, and that's generally 3 to 6 months prior to an egg retrieval.
Amazing. And Joss, can you talk a little bit about the other non-clinical screening intake process that are egg donor
For all of that, that's always a nice sort of educational piece as well from the fabulous Debbie. So thank you. And yeah, I think it's important to understand that we're one of the few organisations that will do the AMH testing at the beginning.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, and I think for us, the reason why is because we don't want to have, recipients, egg donors, to have the wrong information. We've said that already for a recipient, this is extremely emotive. This is, time consuming in regards to, I can imagine the conversations about choosing an egg donor, making sure that it fits the criteria, for the recipients. Only then to get the heartbreaking news that actually, this might not happen.
Well, and also not just for the recipient parents, but also for the egg donor. I mean, that's potentially life-changing for, future family-changing news, right?
100%, Jess. And what we've done, to create a pathway, you quite rightly said at the beginning, Ethica hasn't been born overnight. This is down to a lot of, hard work. Michael and Wes have been dreaming about this baby for, a long time. And, seeing it come to life is incredible. Can I say that? And I'm extremely proud to be part of this process. So again, from an ethical point of view, yes, you're right. The egg donors potentially could have some news that would be extremely heartbreaking for them. So what should we do? Oh my goodness, we're there to support. We are there to nurture, to again hold their hands, to make sure that they are supported. And emotionally, we have our own counsellors, in Ethica, and they are in Mexico City, and they are on hand to be able to provide that emotional support as well. Because you're right, also we need to be able to then, look at what we want to do going forward, so that potential egg donor then is supported in regards to their next sort of path in regards to fertility, because that's, incredibly important.
And often those donors, they might be finding out for the first time. They might be first time donation. They might think everything's fine. They might have regular cycles. There's no contraindicators that everything is, normal. And then they decide to be a donor, which is, a massive thing anyway. And throughout this process that they find out that their ovarian reserve is very low, and they may be young.
Yeah.
And that then absolutely impacts their future family building aspirations. And one of the things that was always really important to us is if people are receiving that type of news, we then put them in a framework where they can get the right level of support emotionally to deal with the news that they're getting, but also how can we then future-proof and give them some plans. So it's about referring them to a fertility specialist who can help them understand exactly what's going on in their scenario, but also then potentially put a plan in place for them to start, banking their eggs for their future family.
That happened quite recently, didn't it? But it was a no-egg donor scenario, and she came forward beautifully for her friends to help them create their family, and we found that her AMH was incredibly low, and she was horrified and shocked, and she plans to have a family in the future, but hadn't considered that her AMH would be affected. So now she has frozen her eggs for her future. And we also do a psychological assessment So that's really important. In Mexico City, it's called a psychological assessment. Back in the UK, it's implications counselling. In the US, it's therapeutical support. So wherever you're coming from, it's all the same. We're analysing or making sure that our donors have full knowledge about the implications of what they're doing and what that might mean to them. Have they got real specific thoughts? Okay, I've donated my egg. What does that mean to me? And if they, in the future, aren't able to have children for whatever reason, how's that going to impact on them in their future? So our psychologists and our counsellors are very experienced in making sure that they have those. So they will pose those questions. They may not have even thought about it, but they'll pose them so that when our donors come on board, we know that they're fully educated, they're fully informed, and they're making informed decisions because they've had all that education.
But I also think it's about their future impact as well. We want to make sure that people understand, they might be in the very much here and now, I want to donate my eggs and make a difference. That's great. We love that motivation, but we also need to help them understand the future impact of that donation, and that the donors themselves are really clear about what that means. Is there potential contact in the future? Are they potentially, they might find out information about their genetics that they just were never planning for. So this process, will highlight and give access to more information than they typically would. So it's about, are they prepared, emotionally, mentally, for what potentially could come out of it, but also for the future. And I think that's a really important part. We all, we say this with intended parents, go on this with your eyes wide open. This is exactly the same for donors. They have to understand that the impact of the donation and what they're doing, and that's again to us really, really important.
Yeah, amazing. Well, thank you for explaining that. And that kind of leads me on to something which might be a question for parents coming from different locations, whether from the US or the UK. How much will they know about their donor, but also how much are they able to share with their future children?
Yeah, I think I'll pick that up because, donation in Mexico, there's no regulation here on donation, and it sits within certain, organ and tissue directives. So, it's unlike the US and the UK. There's a lot more framework around donation that isn't here. But that doesn't mean to say that we don't work within a framework. We absolutely do. But ultimately, donation in Mexico is open or closed. And the it's anonymous as well. So the information, you can have information about the donors because we recognize that's a really important part. But or what you can do is you can know who the donor is, what her name is, and how to make contact with her. So that's how we manage those elements. And it's also about the different types of donors that we provide under the Ethica model. Is that we have local donors who are based here in Mexico City. We have local donors who are based in Mexico, so they could be from Guadalajara or Monterrey, and they travel into Mexico City. And then we also have donors who are based in the US, in Austin, Houston area, and they then start the process of stimulating in the US, and then they fly into Mexico City for the retrieval. And I think that's really important because again, it goes back to that compromising piece. If you're a US intended parent and you might be from a particular state and you want a donor that's from that particular state, then we can look at that. I think it's important to know that we're always going to try and find the best solution for you. And for some people that best solution might be a local donor in Mexico. For others that might be a donor flying in from the US. But ultimately it's our job to really understand what's important to you and then provide solutions to help manage that donor experience. And I think one of the reasons we're looking at places like Austin and the Texas area or state is that we're trying to minimize risk to the donor, inconvenience to the donor. It's a 2.5 hour flight from Texas to Mexico City. When those donors are stimulating, there's risks associated with it. So we're trying to minimize the travel and not having them traveling from other more far-reaching states within the US. But it's also about trying to minimize the cost to the recipients or the intended parents, because we know that this is a very expensive process, and we're very conscious about how we can kind of manage both sides of it, inconvenience and the support for the donor, but also giving the recipients or the intended parents access to the donors they're looking for, but also trying to do it typically in the most affordable way. Jess, you and I know all too well how much donation can cost if the donors are coming from some of the donor programs in the US, and then it becomes just unachievable, which is very, very much against our whole ethos of ethic of donation.
Yeah, absolutely. And well, thank you for explaining that, because I think it's good for intended parents to know, or for recipient parents to know that, they still do have choice, and there's still ways to, for them not to have to compromise.
Yeah.
In all aspects. So let's hope that an intended parent has decided on their egg donor. They've seen a donor that they really like, and they think, gosh, this incredible person is the person that we'd like to move forward with. Can you guys talk a little bit about what happens next? How is there a contract? Do they get to talk to the donor? What does the donor do in terms of actually, the medical side to finish the donation? You talk through that process a bit.
Yeah, so there'll be specific steps that the UK and the Mexico team will follow for consistency in order to support and ensure the duty of care is towards recipients and egg donors. So we want to make sure that all of the information, is given to both parties. We want to be really clear that, again, the processes we put in place, covered medically, emotionally, all of the pieces that we've talked about previously. And we want to make sure, yes, that, the steps are clear, but also that if we need to, again, provide any more information, let's be clear, that's what we're here to do. Those are our jobs. There will be specific teams who will sort of manage certain steps of the process. And again, really clear, because we have, a growing team, which is incredible. Everybody understands which sort of, area of responsibility or accountability they have. But yeah, I mean, essentially there will be an element of information that is given to the recipients, but, there won't be a meeting with the donor. For us, it's sort of dealt with sort of, in a sort of parallel sort of time. But, the recipients will get certain information. And then from us, once that matching process is agreed, that egg donor journey starts, if you like. And that's huge,
It is, and put another lot of one Joss, to really try and preempt the information that the IPs or recipients are going to be looking for, because we're trying to make this process as smooth and as kind of considered as possible. The profiles that maybe US intended parents might be used to from working with other agencies in the US are very, very long, and there's a lot of information in there. And we've always tried to strike a balance between not enough and too much, because often some of the information the intended parents don't know how to interpret it, because some of it is genetic information stuff. So we've really put a lot of thought into building the profile so that it's enough information to allow them to make a decision, and that's why that's there. But we're also going to create a mechanism that if there's any specifics that aren't covered in the profile, that's really important to the intended parents or recipients, is that we can have a mechanism to be able to try and request that information. Now, we will put that to the donor. If the donor's happy to answer that question, then we will facilitate it back. But if the donor's not, and it might be too personal a question or something that they're not just prepared to share, then we can't find that information. But I do think we've covered a broad range of given our experience of kind of topics and areas that people want information on, and I think that's the kind of real drive for making sure that we are giving people access to as much information as we think they're going to need to make the best decisions.
We're very clear when we talk to our donors, and invariably the intended parents want to know or understand this information also. It's not easy to have an egg collection. It's quite a tricky procedure. It takes some weeks of that woman's life. She has to take daily injections, most days 2 injections a day. She has to attend regular scans. She's going to feel sick and bloated and uncomfortable. It's not an easy process to go through.
And
I was just going to say, and the risks associated with it can be really harmful. So we need to make sure that our donors are fully informed, and with no holds barred, we absolutely tell them all of the risks that are entailed within that. Some of them quite dangerous if not managed correctly. So the partners that we work with within the fertility clinics, we are fully aligned with their ethos and the way that they look after. We're not going to overstimulate donors per se, which we know has been talked about and has been said. We absolutely would not do that. We work with their AMH levels, their age, all of the circumstances around their criteria for eligibility, and then make sure that we title that program or that plan to fit that particular donor. And then with the intended parents, when I'm having conversations with them, and we know heterosexual couples in general, they've probably been through an egg collection themselves, maybe, so they have some understanding, but they will still ask questions. Can you just talk us through what's the donor got to go through? Same-sex male couples, they are very interested to understand and know what a donor has to go through, and they're blown away that suddenly this woman is doing all of this for them to have the chance of a family in the future. So it's incredibly empowering to give the information to both sides to make sure everyone understands the whole process, the risks entailed in it, and what the outcome's going to be. Keeping everybody informed at all points. Heterosexual couples, particularly that have been through it before, they feel a little bit aloft. They stand back and they think, we're not going to be there at the scan. We're going to not know what's happening. How many follicles has she got? What's the potential? Is it all going to go ahead? And it's up to us to make sure that is communicated back to them so they're not left aloft and not knowing what's happening. You know, the donors want to make sure that the intended parents have good understanding what's happening. And if things are not going to plan, she's not responding to the medication, we have to put the medication up, or we have to cancel or abandon the cycle. Those things are real and they happen. Ovarian hyperstimulation is a real risk of hyperstimulating a person with too much medication. Sometimes when you start off, somebody could have 10 or 15 follicles and suddenly they become very unwell and respond very, very quickly. Or you could have somebody with 30 or 40 follicles that don't have all of the symptoms. So it's working with the good partners that we do to make sure that they've got the correct clinical protocols, they are reactive to any of the risks or any of the problems that can embark on that journey.
And I think it's worth pointing out that, you know, so whether you're having a local donor here and all that whole process is taking place here, and or whether you're having a donor from the US and they start stimulating, do all the screening in the US and then come over for trigger shot and retrieval in Mexico City, whichever donor you're working with, we are going to be supporting them both, you know, logistically.
We're involved in that whole plan.
And that's why, you know, the integration with My Surrogacy Journey and ethical donation is around how do we, you know, just make sure that it's a seamless process for the donor, but then also that the information as a result of the donation and then moving into embryo creation, that information is then available for the intended parent so that everyone's kept in the loop. And I think that's just really kind of demonstrating that we do support our donors, irrelevant of where they come from, right the way through. And there's, you know, there's lots of different components. Too much to talk about on the podcast, but that
we will not take risks. That's really clear to get this across. That we first rule of medicine: do no harm. I know I say that in lots of podcasts, but that's very indicative and very clear in here.
And if we
if we felt at any point that our donors were at any risk, then we abandon, and that has to be clear. And the intended parents, as much as that excitement of, well, we're finally getting here and we've got our egg donor, and suddenly it's abandoned and that hope is taken away, we have to manage all of that too. But we will not put people at risk.
And I would also say, look, we're dealing with human beings. Everyone's body reacts differently. Things change. Things happen. You know, that's part of some of the things that we need to preempt. And there's you know, you might start seeing things where they're not ending as well, and then we start managing expectations that, you know, this isn't going where it needs to, and we're going to keep going. But actually, just be prepared that, you know, this is
the outcome is going to be different.
And can I say as well, for every point throughout this as well, you know, we're really, really considered in regards to, we're asking the egg donor, how are you? How are you feeling today? This is very personable for us here. We have, and we're building a really sort of clear, you know, idea of, you know, what the process should be like or could be like, but also the risks involved. But also, you know, our team, they care. And that's huge. You know, not every organisation can hand on heart say that. I know we can. And I know that from a point of view with our egg donors, yes, they're going to be fully educated, you know, and they'll have lots of questions, and 100% that's incredible. And we can talk to them about a sort of scenario, kind of this might happen or that might happen. what we also want to do for our local donors is build up a community. So we want them to be able to ask another egg donor, well, how does it feel? Like, really? Because they've said this is how it feels. Does it really feel like that? And we want them to have that honesty and that ability to create that community that's built on, again, trust, transparency, honesty, in regards to what the journey looks like, and be able to be ambassadors for what they've done, what they've achieved, the positivity of what they've done, and really build on that.
High impact. I mean, it's like, and I say this all the time. I have two amazing kids through surrogacy, right? But I wouldn't have those. They changed mine and Michael's life, right?
Yeah.
And I wouldn't have those children without the help of donors. Yeah. And that's just the reality. Like, let's not underestimate the impact donors have. Everyone who's part of this process of a journey with surrogacy, they all play their part, but the donor.
Well, what's incredible, I know this is just slightly outside of this podcast, but what's incredible that comes out of this is, particularly in same-sex male couples that know that they need an egg donor, they quite often, invariably, put themselves forward as a sperm donor. So they're helping somebody else. You find that quite often. Quite often.
Michael.
I didn't want to say that, but
So he did. So Michael.
he did that as a response to that.
He did because he was. We had donor for Talulah and Duke, and he decided he wanted to be a sperm donor. And I think the latest count, there were 7 live births from his donation.
So isn't that incredible? That empowerment of, wow, look what this egg donation has brought about. And now suddenly we've got sperm donors that are now helping others. Incredible. Absolutely incredible. And I love that. Yeah, it's made me go all goosebumpy now, but yeah, it is lovely.
Yeah, Colin here.
And it's like when they ask that innocent question, Debbie, can I help? And I say, in what respect? And they say, well, can I donate my sperm? I said, well, yeah, of course you can. So yeah, it's amazing.
It is.
The little bit that we do that empowers something else, and yeah.
And the types of donors that we're working with as well. So we have first-time donors, people who are wanting to do it for the first time, which is amazing. But we also have experienced donors who've obviously donated before, and we have some kind of donation history around their previous donations, which really helps us give an indication of the type of donor they are. There are some donors that don't have an amazing response, but they have amazing quality eggs, and then maybe for a same-sex couple who are both looking to create embryos, that might not be the right type of donor for them, because they're probably not going to get enough eggs from that retrieval to do what they need, because we're all about future-proofing as well. We might know that this particular donor responds really well, and that might mean that they're an ideal candidate for a same-sex male couple who are both looking to. And that type of information is going to be on the profiles. But one of the questions I had really is, do the recipients or the intended parents get all of the eggs from the donation?
Yes, they do. In our program, yes, they do. There's very different variable programs, egg sharing programs, etc., where you might not get all of the eggs. But like you alluded to, particularly in same-sex male couples where they both want to use their sperm to create sibling links. So that's really important to them. So having the right donor for them is key to make sure. But yes, they will collect all of the eggs. Sometimes we can have donors that come through that on paper and on theory, she looks like an amazing donor. She's got great AMH, responding really well. But on the day of egg collection, she gets much less than was anticipated. We have no known reasons for why this happens. You can have empty follicle syndrome. That's a phenomenon that happens in the fertility world, where you empty a follicle and there's no egg. So that happens, and you can't predict that, because on paper and on the scans, everything's looking absolutely great. So that does happen, and managing the fallout from that, particularly if two guys that are wanting to create the sibling link and they've only got 4 eggs. Realistically, you don't want to split them 2, because that reduces those chances so much. So perhaps the donor might consider donating again for them. We'll often ask those questions in those scenarios. It's not always possible, but invariably she is willing to do that.
Yeah.
So,
but I think
that's managing it all.
We would kind of do a review. We would look at every year, and then we would kind of sit down with the intended parents, kind of go over what we think's happened from a clinical point of view, what they, what the potential outcome was, and what do we want to do moving forward? What's the plan? Because they haven't necessarily achieved what they were hoping for, and it's always a numbers game, right? When we do it, but in these scenarios, what's the plan? And it might be that the donor's prepared to donate again, and they might gain something from the case where you might think, well, we'll look at the dosage of medication, or some elements that they can consider. But ultimately, it's about, and we talk about this all the time, it's about future-proofing your family. If you know that you want to have siblings in the future and you want to safeguard that genetic connection, it's really important to me, and I talk about this a lot, is because that's what we didn't do, Michael and I. We didn't have a podcast like this to listen to tell us how to manage a donation and things we should consider. So we created embryos using Michael's sperm, and the donor already agreed to do sibling journeys, but unfortunately, after Talulah arrived and we started our next journey, the clinic couldn't contact the donor, and it turns out that the donor had got sick and wasn't able to donate again. So we'd lost that genetic link, which we didn't plan for. So we do say to people, like, understand what your plans are for the future, and this is our job to help guide you and understand the impact of your decisions. And if you're not going to create them both now, let's tell you what the risk is, and you make a calculated decision about that. But we should always be trying to safeguard that there if it's wanted, and if you do go with that plan and the outcome wasn't as expected, then let's move quickly to try and safeguard that and future-proof it.
And the types of donors that we have coming through are altruistic in that way, and that they want to support. They've come here for the right reason, to help create and support that family. And if that journey hasn't gone completely to plan, they're willing to support them. And that's what's incredible about these women that come forward.
Talking of the future, I mean, as you were just speaking about future-proofing and, thinking about the genetic connection of your children. But for people who are using an egg donor, I guess this is kind of a two-part question, is, what is there going to be a genetic connection to other children? Will that donor be donating again? Or, she's an experienced donor. What about the donations she's done previously? Mm-hmm. And I guess, can you just give some advice to intended parents consider that and talking about that with their children in the future?
Yeah, I think we've kind of we're putting in place a limit on donation. Like, we've applied the principles to the UK. There's a 10 family limit in the UK, which ensures that there is some consideration around those genetic siblings that invariably donor conceived children have through donors who do multiple donations. And I think it's very important, because we know through 21andMe and all of those, is it 21 or 23?
23?
Yeah. Through genetic testing and DNA, ancestry, and all of those things, that people are finding out about genetic siblings that they didn't know they had, just because now the testing and available data is so much more available now. So I think it is important that that if a donor has donated previously or is going to continue donating, that your children born through this are going to have genetic siblings potentially around the world, and potentially traceable at some point if they wish to do that. So again, I think it's another dynamic that people need to consider when they are looking for donors, that's an element that they might not have considered.
And how, just as a parent of donor conceived children, and you guys, in your experience, for parents who are going down this route of using an egg donor, do you have any advice on how to, how to talk to their kids about that in the future?
Yeah, that's amazing.
Like a whole other episode.
It probably is another episode, but there's a lot of research data around this as well. Is that
how you tell them when to tell.
Oh yeah, no. Like in our family, I'm talking from my own experience with Mike and I. We've had lots of conversations about how we're going to handle this, and obviously these conversations are all around age appropriateness and when the child is equipped to be able to deal with the information you're telling them. But ultimately, they should never be able to sit down conversation. Michael and I, really discussed that this should always be part of their narrative. And it's, again, when it's right, but our children have always known that they're donor conceived. They've always known that we had to use surrogacy to create our family, and that it's always been part of their narrative. Talulah talks up in class at show and tell talking about sperm and eggs, and but and
It's amazing.
but at the right time, when Talulah is ready to start talking and potentially contacting,
It's slightly easier in a same-sex male couple because
it is,
the children will clearly understand. Look, there was egg donor camp.
But I also say that even in hetero scenario, they shouldn't be a secret. It should always be there. It should always be part of who they are, because the data shows that if the donor conceived person later down the line finds out, it ups and
Devastating.
it's devastating, and it's really can be quite catastrophic in a lot of cases. So the organizations that we work with that specialize in supporting and intended parents and donor conceived people, their absolute recommendation is about honesty, openness, and
That's why counselling is really important.
yeah, and that would be my advice to anyone who's creating their family through donor conception, is that they really consider and think about what that means to them and what that means to their children in the future and how they're going to manage it, but ultimately as upfront as possible.
There's been lots of really big cohort studies that have looked at donor conceived people and the impact that it's had as when and how they were told. So there's some really good, interesting studies out there, and the impact has been horrific on some, but they have,
isn't it? Just changes turns the world upside down, because it's just like the whole, everything they've had in their past is just doesn't feel real because no one was honest with them, and look, every kid, I massively appreciate that everyone embarks on a journey and decides to communicate in the way they do, thinking it's the right thing to do. I don't think people do it maliciously, but I think it's a very, there's lots of elements to consider here, and I think that's why ethical is so important, because we consider all of those elements and we help people understand the longer term impact, and we give them the skills and give them access to the resource about how are you going to make sure that your children are equipped in the future with the tools to be able to manage these conversations.
Amazing. Well, gosh, again,
I didn't think this would be as long that it's good. I mean, but it just goes to show that the type of conversations that come out through this. There's so many different dynamics with donation. There's also many different dynamics with the people who are creating their families this way. So, and I think it's about how do we make sure that.
Yeah, but these are the comfortable decisions, the comfortable conversations that we're having day in, day out now with our intended parents and our donors, and we just wanted to get across in this podcast, that make sure that you're really well informed, that you're educated, do you understand the whole process, and that you go in there with your eyes wide open, whether you're a recipient or a donor, and be prepared for it all.
Yeah, and me and Ethica, I'm just gonna
new team.
The royal we.
Go.
The royal we.
But I think, that's one of the amazing things that you guys have been doing behind the scenes as you build up this program, is the consideration for everybody involved in this program, from the start to, getting the donors on board, making sure that they are comfortable that they're going to be good donors, providing that education and support to everybody, to donors and parents, and supporting parents, even beyond once their children are born, so that they can be have that information and knowledge on how to approach this with their children. This is, this is not just a one-time thing.
Yeah, and it doesn't just stop with the donation, right? It continues all the way through, and that's what we want to show we capture. Well, look, thank you both, our amazing guests.
Amazing.
You've been amazing guests with the Bite Dev of Mexico City.
This seems like your 100th podcast.
Bring it on. See you next week. Nice.
Jess, what was a highlight for you? What was a standout moment for you?
Oh my gosh, I think to me it was just, I've been privileged to kind of be on the periphery as Ethica has grown, but just to hear about all the considerations that you guys have made from the donor's perspective, from the intended parent's perspective, how you can support and integrate that. I just, even knowing some of that information, I was just blown away at how holistic it is, really.
Yeah.
But how do you?
I think for me, it's the kind of everything behind the scenes that's going on from a screening point of view, the support, all of those elements. And one thing we haven't touched on the podcast is extended carrier screening. That we manage all of the. There's a whole nother episode of the. But again, it's something that we can support with, and it's something that we do as pretty as standard. So I think there's just there's a lot. But I think, look, we could talk all day, but I just want to thank you both for your input. You both got a massive amount of experience. We're really lucky to have you on board as either Ethica or My Surrogacy Journey. So thank you.
Pleasure as always.
So I hope you enjoyed today's episode and that we managed to answer all of your questions. And if not, you know where we are. So today's process is really important because there's so much misinformation out there as well. When you're doing cross-border surrogacy, some of these things are really, really important considerations, particularly when you're dealing with different jurisdictions. So it's about, really trying to understand those things. And particularly when you're doing it in Mexico City, we have some amazing donors. And we have some amazing donors in the US. So, I'm sure we can find a donor that meets your requirements.
Absolutely. So thank you so much for joining us on this episode. Don't forget that there is another episode available, whether you're listening to this via our app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts from. And there's still time to get another fix.
So if you need more information about the products and services that we provide at My Surrogacy Journey or at Ethica, then you can head over to our website, which is mysurrogacyjourney.com. And if you need any more information or general information about how we can support you in building your family, we're here to do that. There's obviously more podcasts to come. We're like halfway through the day and there's a mini more to come out. I'm so excited that you've got some amazing guests coming up, right?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you to Debbie and Joss for joining us, for sharing your expertise and your wisdom and just your positivity. You guys are amazing. Thank you so much. And thank you, listener, for taking the time to join us today. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and feel free to leave a review too, especially if you enjoyed it. So until next time, hasta luego.